Welcome to Damsels in Dialogue, a podcast dedicated to female protagonists in fiction, film, and the stage. Co-hosted by India Marie Paul
and Katie Zetter. For our inaugural season, we will be focusing on 8 animated heroines from Walt Disney feature films.
This episode, we dive into a legend that has sparked entire fields of study among scholars and a somewhat overlooked Disney film that takes us on a journey to discover a lost city where we meet the princess of Atlantis, Kida. Okay, so today we get to talk about Atlantis and this crazy legend science study and the amazing princess Kida.
Yes.
Or Kidakakash, which I love saying.
It's an interesting name.
It's really cool, and it came from, it's my first fun fact. Let's just start us off strong.
Yes.
Kidakakash, it's a Kiowa, I think it's Kiowa girl's name, meaning raising away the darkness.
Oh, I love that.
And I believe that's a native tribe. I'm not sure if that's American or where that is set.
Yeah.
But yeah, raising away the darkness makes complete sense. So it was really fun. That's a really fun fact to start off with. So our last episode, we were in Greece and talking about mythology. And actually, the legend of Atlantis and the myth of Atlantis comes from Greece as well. The original story is not a typical Greek mythology story. There's no vases, paintings. There's no evidence that it was in oral tradition before it was written down by Plato. The first known mention of Atlantis is from Plato, one of Plato's dialogues. So Atlantis shows up in some of his last dialogues in the Timaeus and the Critias, I think. No scholar get on me about how I'm pronouncing anything in this. But mostly it was in the Critias, but it was actually left incomplete. So this kind of adds to the mystery of Atlantis as well. But it's mentioned there's someone talking to a king about Atlantis, and he kind of tries to explore, I believe, and what a lot of people believe is he's exploring hubris and being too greedy, because Atlantis is this massive island off of the Pillars of Hercules, which I did some digging, and that means the Pillars of Hercules is there's a legend where Hercules has to travel across what is now the Strait of Gibraltar. He has to cross the mountain that was once Atlas, and instead of climbing the mountain of Atlas, he smashes through it and coincidentally creates the Strait of Gibraltar that connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea.
Classic Greek mythology.
So
accidentally creating
the thing.
Just massive geological things.
Exactly. So it's funny that Hercules came up again in this.
Yeah.
Or Heracles, if we're going to use his Greek name. Proper Greek name, as we have learned. So he created this. So that's where Plato places it. And that, for people who aren't good at geology like myself, I had to look it up. The Strait of Gibraltar is south of Spain, north of Morocco. So he places it there. It's this large island. It's this powerful empire, and it was created by Poseidon. So it says that Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Kida, had 10 sons. One of them was named Atlas, and he became the king of Atlantis.
Atlas, like, holding the...
I don't think it's the same Atlas, but it definitely is the Atlantis king.
Atlas
of
is Atlas just like
maybe
the
just
Greek
popular
version of Brittany?
Like Brittany.
Like,
everyone was named Brittany?
Yeah.
The boys were named Jason?
It's a little throwback.
Throwback to Hercules. It felt so relevant because we recorded these back to back. So it was really fun to dive into this. So the kingdom of Atlantis, there's no magic in it. There's no weapons. It's just this ancient kingdom. He specifically says that there are 3 rings around it, around the capital. There's like a hill and there's a capital on this hill or a temple on this hill. And there are 3 channels of seawater, so they all connect out to the ocean, which you do see in the Disney film.
Yeah.
I was really, when I read that and then I rewatched Atlantis, I went, there they are! They're the 3, the 3 rings. So that was really a really cool detail that they took from Plato. He goes into a lot of detail about exactly how Atlantis is and what it's like and the topography of Atlantis. And that's also why some people believe that he was writing about a real place. It's because it's so detailed. There's a lot of reasons why people think it's real, but I'll try to minimize all of that. If you really want to study, become an Atlantologist and just go dive into that. But the gods were really angry with Atlantis because Atlantis was trying to conquer everything around it and to build their empire. And they actually, why Plato was telling it was he said that Atlantis tried to take over Athens and should have, but Athens, even with their smaller army, kept them back. So it was kind of also talking about Athens as being this strong presence and Atlantis overstepping their bounds. And then the gods were mad at them after they tried to take Athens and sent a huge earthquake to destroy them, turned into a flood that then destroyed Atlantis. But then he doesn't finish this, like that's where we end it, but he never finished it. So it also adds this level of mystery. There is a lot of mythology that can be connected back to real events, but this one, no one truly... There are people who stake their reputations on the reality of Atlantis. So I don't want to say no one truly believes it, because people do. There has been an entire field of study called Atlantology, and they're Atlantologists, and they're very intelligent people who are very determined to believe that this is real.
Very Milo of them.
Very Milo, it's very Milo of them. And I think when they were researching it, because they had to dive through all of these too when they were researching Atlantis, that they must have been inspired by just the amount that they had to go through. And what we find out is they're a big mixture of a lot of the things that happened. So Plato wrote the original story of Atlantis. He writes a lot of parables and stories to teach philosophy. So to me, it's a parable about greediness and hubris and all of that. That's my interpretation, and I believe most people's interpretation. He sets Atlantis in about the end of the Ice Age. Like when people studied it, they put it kind of it's about 10,000 years ago. That's when it would have happened.
I wanted to know if Plato wrote all the way until the point that Atlantis was brought and sunk down into the sea. What do you mean by the story wasn't finished? Because I haven't read it, but in my eyes, it seems like, okay, they were naughty and they went down and that's that. So how was it not finished?
It wasn't finished. The dialogue itself wasn't finished, the Critias. So there could have been the fallout of what happened to them after. Did they all perish? Are they still alive under the ocean? Like it's because his dialogue wasn't finished. So his play wasn't finished. And it kind of cut off right after that, I believe.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
It feels very finished to me as well. So he might never have wrote anything else about it, but because he didn't finish his dialogue, because it was his last one, people speculate about the fact that it's not done. He could have added that it still exists. He could have added how you find it. He could,
I did not know there was an entire field of study about it. So
I didn't either. I knew it was always kind of this fun legend.
Yeah.
That everyone's like, what happened to Atlantis? Was it real? Was it not? But the more I listen to different podcasts that talk about fake history and really dive in, that I really enjoyed, but there's just a lot of very passionate people who are very smart and who are digging through all of the texts and trying to find clues, and it's a huge conspiracy of it. Not even that they still exist, that Atlantis existed. So it's looking for the ruins. I don't know that a lot of people expect there to be people in this place, but they expect to find ruins. And proof of ruins, specifically if they find the 3 rings around the hill. That's kind of like the biggest indicator.
Yeah.
So you don't really hear about Atlantis after that either. It's not until the Renaissance where people start writing about it in fiction. There's a lot of people bringing up Roman and Greek mythology at that time too, so that it kind of reemerges, and it's not until the late 1800s that Atlantis becomes this explorer phenomenon. And it's because there's this ex-Minnesota congressman. So the conspiracy theories are coming from America. So that's great. Doing great. So he retired and got fascinated with Mayanism and the legends of Atlantis specifically. And the idea that Atlantis inspired Mayan and Aztec and Incan architecture along with Egyptian, because there are some similarities between them. And so there was a theory that they both knew about Atlantis, and Atlantis has inspired them because they're so separate but have similarities. So he got really interested in that. And then
How did he explain their geological distance?
The explanation is just that Atlantis was this place everyone knew. I think.
Okay. That's just curious.
I'm sure that there's a lot of interesting stuff. Like he published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in 1882. And that's where he proposed Atlantis was a real place. And he started to add in kind of his own theories other than just Plato's story, some of which were, he claimed that Noah's flood was the same flood And the book was a hit with the populace, not with the science community. They completely were like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
But it sparked
interesting story.
Yeah, it sparked this real big interest. I mean, this is also in 1882. So there's a lot of beginning of exploration of the world. And they actually, I think this is the time when the ruins of Troy were discovered. If not, then definitely when it fed into it because Troy was thought to be a legend, but using mythology to kind of dive in, they found the ruins that would have been Troy. So there's already then this existing finding of something that makes it even more interesting that Atlantis could have existed. So that's where it re-sparked in the late 1800s. And they set the Disney movie in 1914. So it's kind of it would have been his grandfather would have probably gotten in on that. Milo's grandfather would have gotten in on that reemergence, and then he passed it to Milo. So that's kind of an interesting where they set it and probably why they set it then. This all sparked then the Atlantology field of study. The glowing crystals, I thought, were just a Disney creation. But they were not.
Cool.
They were not at all.
What are they from?
So in 1923, there was a clairvoyant psychic specialist prophet named Edgar Casey who started having visions of Atlantis. So Edgar Casey was known as the sleeping prophet or the father of holistic medicine. And he started documenting his psychic visions in the 20th century, and he was the most documented psychic in that century. He would lay down and put himself into a meditative state and claim to connect to this universal consciousness and then get answers about the universe, questions that he would ask in this moment. So he started having visions or asking, I don't know what sparked the start of him having these visions of Atlantis, or if he purposefully went forward, or if it came to him, or what. I'm sure there's a deeper dive to go into that too, but we're not doing that. Keep it simple as I can. He claimed to have connected and seen the truth of Atlantis, and he claimed that they had glowing crystals that powered advanced technology in Atlantis.
Oh, hey, Disney.
Mm-hmm.
We see you.
They took it straight from his visions.
Cool.
And he said that they brought about their own disaster through a civil war, and that the survivors of the flood fled to Egypt and buried proof of Atlantis under the paw of the Sphinx.
So now is everyone try and dig up the poor
I don't
Sphinx
know
paw?
that anyone has. I don't know that you could without destroying it. I don't.
That's so unique. What a cool thing. It seems like Disney did a really good job feeding into that, building off of all of that.
They did. They really pieced a lot of things together. And I thought what they actually said in the making of documentary that I watched was that they were trying to find the plausible impossible, which is the famous phrase from Walt Disney, where it's just possible enough that you could take the extra step to believe it.
Yeah.
So they really tried to make it as realistic as possible. It was I definitely went into this research believing that the glowing crystals had to be a Disney invention, and it was not. I don't know if he saw it as the life force, like they were connected to something. I think that might have been Disney. I just know the glowing, powerful crystals were from his visions and that they powered advanced technology. So there was another psychic that claimed that Atlantis was the start of all races and it could be found in the Canary Islands, which is northwest of Africa. So there are already...
I've heard of that story.
Yeah. That there are already multiple places where Atlantis could be. I'm sure people have come up with so many. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle throws in there somewhere. Like there's so many...
Oh, I'm sure.
versions of it. But I thought it was interesting. There's another famous psychic who claimed that it was of all races, and that connects to Disney's Atlantis because they created a version of Atlantis where they were the first language, or they were kind of this idea of all things combined. So they could understand all of the languages that were spoken to them because they were the root language.
Yeah. That was a really cool scene to watch.
It was really cool, and kind of start picking out, oh, that's French. Oh, that's not, like, I don't even know all the languages that are spoken in that scene.
No, but it was very well executed in the world building.
Yeah, and I think it was a direct response to Pocahontas where she magically learns English. This actually gave it a real tangible reason why she could speak to them.
Right.
So it felt like a very direct response to the magic of Pocahontas.
We're trying not to mess up.
Yes, exactly. So that was kind of funny. And there's different sects of Atlantologists who follow the Ignatius Donnelly and the book idea, and then some who are just talking about Plato and trying to decipher that because that's the only real historic legend written down about Atlantis.
Right.
So there's a lot to dive into with Atlantis, but that's kind of the overview of where it started and where the Disney team would have gone to.
Yeah.
How Disney came about doing it is actually really interesting too. So it's not, the whole thing became a very interesting journey to take. It was released in 2001, and it is the same creative team behind Hunchback of Notre Dame. So after Hunchback of Notre Dame, they decided they wanted to keep the team together. A lot of them had been together in Beauty and the Beast because it's that team as well, and then did Hunchback, and then they kind of needed another project or they'd all be split up and go different ways. So they went to a Mexican restaurant and sat around having margaritas and nachos.
Where all the best ideas are formed.
All the best ideas are over margaritas and nachos. And so they were trying to figure out what to do next, what project they wanted to do. They have a little bit of clout because they've now directed Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback. Mm-hmm. And they all discovered that they really, really loved the old classic adventure action movies like Star Wars, Indiana Jones. So they all were kind of those dorks and those lovers of movies. And you see it with some of the cast. I mean, they brought in Leonard Nimoy to be the king, who's Spock. They did bring in the guy who created Klingon and Vulcan language
that's so cool.
to create,
that's so cool.
to create the Atlantean language, which is a fully fledged thing. They brought in Michael J. Fox to be Milo, and he was Back to the Future. So you have these people who are in those, which is really fun. It felt like kind of a big dork fest.
Aren't those directors like significantly younger than some of the other big directors at the time?
I think so. They were in Beauty and the Beast because they were young story artists, but that was in the beginning of the 90s. So they probably would be like 30s.
Yeah, but that's still
pretty young,
younger than even from when we were talking about Hercules. I mean, the guys who did that took all their inspiration from the 40s because that was what was cool for them, you know?
Yeah, so it's funny.
It's interesting.
It's really cool. And a lot of the sounds are very Star Wars in Atlantis. Like the Atlantean fish when they're doing their beams of light, like it sounds like little Star Wars blasters. Like you can hear the influence and the love of that genre, and you can see it in a lot of it.
It's very sci-fi without being sci-fi.
It's very Indiana Jones sci-fi, but not Crystal Skull. Like it's right. It's very. It feels like and they wanted to do an adventure movie.
It very much is. They succeeded.
They did succeed in that, and one of the things they really wanted to accomplish was creating something that made children want to explore or that sparked the adventurer imagination. And this was something that was very different than what Disney did. It's very different. They don't really do that, which is one of the reasons why they struggled to kind of find an audience for this movie. There's a lot of reasons why this didn't explode in a really amazing way, because they were trying to take it on a new course. Disney Renaissance is kind of pegged to have ended around 1999. So this is right after when they're trying to search for where Disney animation goes next. And so they were trying this, and they convinced the studio to let them do it they had a track record, which is good. But they also reminded them that Disney used to make a lot of their money by the live action movies they used to do, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So those are movies that they had grown up with seeing, and those were very adventure heavy. But they convinced them that instead of doing something for Fantasyland, they wanted to do something for Adventureland. So that's what they were trying to dig into. Let's try something different. So they let them. And this was a huge undertaking for the CG department. Because
oh my gosh,
there's so much. All of the submarines, the Leviathan is CG. So many action shots are CG. And they do a really good blending of them, I think. And I think what helped was the art style. There's a comic book artist named Mike Mignola, and he did the Hellboy series. So he was the artist on the Hellboy series, and they really loved his style. And so they called him up and asked him to be a designer, a production designer and
that's
consultant
so cool
for this. And he kind of was like, how did you get my number?
We're Disney.
Yeah, how intimidating. So not only do you have these two directors who were determined not to do a musical, they were very like, we don't want to do that. We want to do an adventure. So they brought in all of these sci-fi people and adventure heroes to voice act. And then they bring in a comic book artist to really kind of take the style of the show and run with it. And you see it in the high contrast in the squared off fingers. That's very specifically his stuff.
Their jaw, Milo's jaw is
it's just very
just
angular.
A long, skinny, like, yeah. It's very cool. I enjoy the animation a lot. And I think you're totally correct in that it helps with the blending. Because even, not to mention Hercules again, but they only used the CGI for the one big creature in that battle, the Hydra. And you can tell from a mile away that is not the same kind of animation. So they've come a lot in only a couple of years.
They researched a lot of Greek, Roman, South Asian, Mayan. They kind of researched all cultures because for the movie, they really wanted to blend everything. And I started to see it with the columns that existed in Atlantis, but then you have South Asian statues in the throne room. They tried to throw in this kind of mother culture, mother race feeling original root system. And that's in the Atlantean style as well, where they have light colored hair, but they have dark skin. So Kida is kind of an amalgam of a lot of different cultures and trying to make her feel ambiguous.
Right.
Which is really interesting.
While still very much being they're all people of color.
Yes.
It's just you can't quite pinpoint where.
Yeah, but they were trying to avoid a full Greek or Roman version of Atlantis because that's what typically people take it in because of Plato. Right. So they were really trying to avoid that, and I think they did a really good job with that. One of the things that I found really interesting was that I love the opening of this film. I love that you meet Atlantis and then you have to go find it. So you meet you get to see the history, you get to meet Kida, so you already have a knowledge of Atlantis. You have more knowledge of what happened to Atlantis than Milo does even. So I think that's an interesting thing we get to see. But originally, they had a huge opening where there was a Vikings who had the Shepherd's Journal. And the Shepherd's Journal is created by the screenwriter for this film. Because he's like, I wanted a map. I wanted a map to Atlantis so that it made sense. And it felt real. But it was the Vikings who had the Shepherd's Journal and loses it off of Iceland, where his grandfather finds it. And they get attacked by like a sea monster. So that was the original opening. They fully animated this thing. They fully animated it. They fully colored it because that was the opening.
I mean, it makes sense. I'm not surprised by that option.
It completely connects you to the Shepherd's Journal. But what happened, so they did the whole thing. It cost $5 million to do just this opening. And then the head of story turned to them one day and was kind of like, please don't hate me, but we don't care about the Atlanteans because we don't meet them until 40 minutes into the movie. So he came up with the idea of putting baby Kida and the history of Atlantis in the beginning and then jumping so that you have this emotional connection to them. I can't imagine not knowing who Kida was until 40 minutes in.
Right.
It probably needed to be longer. They cover so much ground when you start thinking about the fact that it's a full-on getting to go on a journey, a full journey to find Atlantis, but it's not just finding Atlantis. Then you have a whole discovery of a new city, and then you have to save the whole city. So it kind of feels like 3 stories that you have to do in a whole movie.
Which is crazy because it's the same length as Hercules.
Is it?
Yeah, because I watched them like almost back to back and was like, oh, an hour and 36 minutes. And then I jumped to Atlantis like a day later, an hour and 38 minutes. I'm like, that's oddly specific for them to be so close. And I just brushed it off to being like, maybe that was just Disney's thing where they were like, it needs to be roughly an hour and a half.
It was because they were kind of forcing them to cut it down. I think that was one of the things that worked against it is that they originally went out to create a journey movie. So they were inspired by Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is a famous novel. In that book, they actually do find the ruins of Atlantis, but it's really quick. So they kind of took inspiration from that. And one of the reasons that I think this movie had trouble, one, finding an audience, but also finding kind of a foothold is that Disney is really known for emotionally connecting and for finding heart in things and being about something. And I think this movie, if you dig into it, is about greed for power and not trusting people to not abuse power. But really, it feels like they wanted to create an adventure movie.
Right.
It feels like they started with the want of a genre rather than wanting to tell a specific story, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
And I think that's what kind of worked against this movie.
Yeah.
It feels like they did a really cool thing. And this one feels like it wasn't focused on the character's journey as much as the journey itself. I was trying to really figure out, like, what is it that doesn't quite land? Because it was a $100 million budget movie, and they made 186 worldwide. So they made the money back, but that is not what Disney considers a hit.
No.
At all.
That's less than the Hercules disappointment.
Yep.
Man, how crazy. Because it's still a very good movie, but I think you're right. It's just wasn't right for Disney almost, like their brand.
You know, I would be interested to see what happens with the live action, because they they tried to make a live action adventure into an animated. And I think there's more of an audience for that today.
Oh, totally.
I think there's a much more...
And a live action could be really cool. If they cast it right.
Yeah, it could be really
cool. That could be really cool. And especially with modern technology and the updated CGI.
It could be really interesting. So I am really interested in that. But the background artist was Lisa Keene on this one as well, who was Hunchback, which is really great. Love seeing her.
Big fan.
I was really excited to see in the documentary that there was a little more diversity in the creative team than there was in other movies. A Black supervisor of special effects. It was Marlon West, and it was his first time being a supervisor. And like, oh, you get the film with all of the special effects.
Yeah.
Because you have to do bubbles, explosions, like all of these. And then you had a female editor, you had a female head of background. The lead animator on Dr. Sweets was one of the few Black animators, which I thought was really amazing.
Yeah. This very much matches the cast itself. I felt the cast was very diverse for its time as well. And nobody was questioned.
Yes, it did feel like they purposely... Yeah, it didn't feel forced. I was very excited. They had a lot of people with different languages spoken in it, because they had French, they had an Italian with Vinny, they had the Latin American who spoke Spanish sometimes with Audrey. You had the elderly female communications head, who I love and we'll talk about in the after hours.
Oh my gosh, comic relief queen.
I love her. So but you also had women in positions of power. You had Helga and you had Audrey and you had Mrs. Packard as head of communications. So you had on this exploration, you had
different ages, different body types, there was a lot happening there. I really appreciated it.
I really appreciated it too. And it made me really happy to know that Dr. Sweets, who was one of the first Black lead characters, gets a very ensemble piece, which is why, like, we're gonna have to talk a little bit not about Kida, because it's just a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll get there because I love her. She shows up 40 minutes into the film, which is sad.
And what is she based off of? They did all this research about Atlantis. How did we get to her? We get to her so her supervising animator is Randy Haycock. He actually did Baby and Young Hercules. And he goes on to do Prince Naveen when they do Princess and the Frog. But her personality, he was very intimidated by Cree Summer, who is the voice actress. So when they first met, he was very intimidated by just like how much energy and power she held in a room. Right. So he tried to put that into Kida, which I thought was really cool. But he tried to create her using the mother or the original race legends. So he really tried to mix as much as he could. So she had a slightly wider nose. She had lighter hair, darker skin. Face shapes are from different cultures. So he really tried to kind of mix a lot of her angles to be as ambiguous. So it kind of just came from an amalgamation and from the design team coming together, especially with the comic book feel. Yeah. Where'd the character itself originate, though? I understand where they got Milo from. It seems like he was pulled straight from like that culmination of this is what I want to do and it's real, you know. And everybody else, it's really cool how they've clearly had openings of we need a mechanic, we need a this and this and this. And they put these very diverse people, but when did they decide that there would be people in Atlantis, and how did they decide that Kida would be a main character and what she was?
They originally, in the journey to the center of the earth, it's ruins. And so they were trying to figure out how to make the movie more interesting, because it's the journey itself might be fun for some people, but you kind of need a goal or a destination.
Right. And it is very cool to have people there.
They decided they think they're going to discover ruins, and they thought it would be much more interesting if they discover people. And so that someone had come up with that in a story meeting, and then it sparked, okay, this is the goal. So then they have a goal for the journey. So they originally started with just scenes upon scenes of them discovering monsters on the way. So it became almost a monster film. And on their first kind of storyboard screening, where they put them all together and they kind of show the producers and the executives, they brought everyone into a room, right? They brought everyone into the room, then asked everyone but the director and like the writer to leave. So they're like, okay, you can't make a monster film. What is this going to be about? Or what is... They had to go back to the drawing board and then decided for them to fully discover Atlantis and it be kind of a part of a thing. I think, this is my opinion, is that they probably wanted a princess because it was a Disney kind of tradition.
Yep. They're like, this will sell.
This will sell. Like, so I think they threw in a princess and I know they specifically wanted her to not be a typical Disney princess. So I think they also were pushing the envelope of, we want to not be what Disney is used to, so we can use what they usually do and push it the other way. So they made her a warrior woman. They didn't want her to be dainty. They didn't want her to be a damsel in distress. She's fabulous. In Plato's story, there is a hierarchy structure already kind of in place. There is a king of Atlantis in Plato's story. So you already have the king. If you have Atlantis, you're going to have a king. So he would have a princess. So then you can feed into all of that. So I think...
So she's not based off of anything that exists. Like Disney
not that I'm aware
her
of.
Entirely. Yeah. Okay, cool. No, that's really awesome. I appreciate that about her, because once again, they built a very cool character out of nothing.
They did.
I enjoy that.
I did. She's a warrior princess. She is wearing a lot less clothing than she necessarily needs to, which harkens back to the Star Wars-ness to me of the Princess Slave Leia. It definitely felt a little like that.
In other, like you saw as you went around the village, you saw people wearing similar clothes to her, but none of them wore quite as little as she did.
Yes. And then you see her beautiful queen outfit at the end. Ooh. So you know that she can wear a dress. And
it's so fully covering, though. It's like such a beautiful, ornate, structured, so ambiguous piece of clothing that's so cool.
Yeah. What helps is that Milo never objectifies her. He does think she's really pretty, but it immediately...
Pretty girl.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he's
pretty good.
Yeah. So he has a couple of those, but it never feels creepy. And then he instantly gets more interested in her culture and learning about Atlantis.
Right. He's like overwhelmed by how pretty she is.
Yes.
And
then they move on and learn from each other.
He's too excited about the other stuff.
So it becomes more of them learning from each other. Yeah. Than anything like romantic with them, which I think is really cool. Mm-hmm. They are one of the only Disney couples who don't kiss.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool that they kind of gave them that growth to happen in their relationship, where it wasn't about the romance. It really was about them learning from each other and then kind of bonding.
Still over the course of like 6 hours.
Yeah, it's really fast. But they also, I don't think that they're in love. Like you get the idea that he's staying, and that they're together, but not that, okay, we're going to be married now. Like in the second movie, they are officially like together and it's really sweet. But in this movie, it could just be the beginnings of something.
Which is also nice that they didn't kiss, because it wasn't like, I've immediately fallen in love.
Yes. I really appreciated that. And that he also had a female friend in Audrey too. Mm-hmm. So like that friendship also got to develop too, which I think is really interesting. And they purposely wanted to have a character that was closer to Milo's age for him to bond with on the journey. And that's how Audrey came to be.
But she's significantly younger than him.
She's like 17. Yeah. She's 17.
Yeah, because she's a complete teenager.
Yeah.
They call her that.
Yeah. And then Kida Kakash is 8,800 years old.
Yes.
And that plays into Atlantis being like 10,000 years old. So she wouldn't have been the first round of people around. That's one of the reasons why people believe she's not considered a Disney princess, because technically she fits all the bills other than not being like an age group, and that her film was not a box office hit.
Yeah.
That's kind of her and the Black Cauldron Princess. Those are the two who technically...
Actual princesses.
Yeah, who technically should be involved but are not. So that's a big one.
How dare you?
And Cree Summer, who is the voice artist, you might know her from Susie Carmichael in the Rugrats.
No.
Yes. I was so excited when I found out. And something that she really loved about the experience was animators would come in and watch her do her recordings and sketch her. And she thought it was the coolest thing. Because you don't really get that in other animated ventures. So she really loved the process. And she says that she considers her a princess, even though no one else does.
She is, though. She may not 100%. Be in the official Disney princess lineup, but she is a Disney princess.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. So that's kind of the start of Kida and how I've gotten through Atlantis, what Atlantis was, how they tried to get it going, why it probably didn't do so well. When you rewatched it, what were your kind of initial thoughts on Kida?
I really liked her. I always liked her growing up.
Yeah.
Fun fact, I own a Kida swimsuit.
Yes, you do!
From Hot Topic.
I love that.
So the top is like almost screen accurate, and the bottom's a little different, but still. I always really liked her, obviously, and I really appreciate how she was characterized as... She almost is never interested in Milo physically.
Yes.
Like, and comments on it a bunch.
Yeah. And doesn't understand why he's so weird about it.
Yeah. And it's everything. She is so logical. Like, so logical. You know, very inquisitive and everything. So I really appreciated those moments where she's like, oh, you must be an intellect. And she just rips him down, just calls out exactly what he is without even batting an eye. And then when she like takes off the swimsuit cover thing to go swimming, she doesn't think anything of it because that's the logical next step. Gotta show him this.
Yeah, we gotta swim.
And she's like, we're swimming. Like, why are you looking at me weird?
Yeah.
Can't you swim? You know? So like, and
so
that's how
blunt.
she kind of does.
Confident.
Right. That's kind of how she does everything, which I really appreciated about her because you did have many characters who knew how pretty they were.
Yeah.
You know, Meg knows how pretty she is. Jasmine knows how pretty she is.
Yes.
Which also are fine things to be.
Helga knows who she is in this. She's the femme fatale.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. You know, so it was very cool to have her be that. So I love that about her. I loved her thirst for knowledge. I love her excitement. I think that's where her and Milo really connected, their excitement over knowledge and learning. Something that I was really confused about with her character coming back was, okay, she's super intelligent. She knows all these languages. She immediately can pick apart Milo's part in the group and what he is, but she can't figure out how names work. I was very confused by that.
Oh, with the like, you speak English, but you don't understand how you can have names that are things.
Right. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me because you would be able to know this person is a doctor, this person deals with dirt, this person, like she would have been able to suss all that out really quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't mind getting confused because Sweet is a very strange name. He is also very sweet. So that first sentence of her being like, wait, he's sweet? Okay, but his name is Sweet, but he's sweet. That didn't bother me. But then that it kept going. And by the end, she was still super wrong.
Yeah. Is that like at some point, I feel like Milo as the scholar should have been like, okay, his name is Dr. Sweets. He's a very kind person. Cookie has a nickname of Cookie because he's a chef. Like, it would have just explained it. So either Milo is horrible at teaching things,
or they really missed the.
Yeah.
You know, it just was strange. It just was strange to me that she didn't catch that. And there were other things they could have done to show how different they are. We could have seen a little montage of cultural things of that world instead of her not understanding how names work.
Yeah, because we already established, you're right, that she has mastered English because they are the root of all language. So her understanding of linguistics would be fantastic.
So that was really strange for me. It didn't like pull me out or anything. Yeah. It just was like, that's weird. Something that did pull me out a little bit is her, this is going to be real strange and really oddly specific. For it. Her size changed a lot in the animation.
Her size and her color.
Yeah.
It was in flux a lot.
Especially the bust. The bust kept getting, like in some scenes, it was like inappropriately large. But then in other scenes, she was almost flat chested. And that almost pulled me out more because I'm like, pick a body type. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Well, and like what bothered me was they did really well at women shapes in this. You had a muscular Helga, which I loved.
Oh, she's great.
She's drawn so well. Mm-hmm. She has great muscle definition. Audrey is drawn bigger but strong. So she also has a different body type than just a regular skinny princess. Mm-hmm. And then you have Mrs. Packard, who's like her own fun shape.
Right.
And then Kida,
fun old lady shape.
Yes. Kida had the tiniest arms I've ever seen in my life. They didn't fit her body in a lot of shots.
Especially with all of the climbing and all of the athletic stuff they do. Like,
just
she
make her have muscles. Like, I don't.
Right. She can be curvy. Don't get me wrong, but stick to it.
And they did give her like a delt. Like they gave her a good shoulder muscle. But then her actual arms, like it didn't, I don't know. Which is so funny because they go out of their way to make fun of how tiny Milo is. And then she was like, her arms were the same size. Yep.
Throwing back to how strong she is and how unique she is up to this point. Her scaling the sides of her own buildings. Yep. And you see how they haven't cleared away, even though it's still a very vibrant city and there's people living there, they haven't cleared away the vines that creep up the side. And but it doesn't feel overgrown. It feels very natural and organic, and that's how they've purposefully left it. And that's really cool as Kida walks around. So that was another reason I'm like, I wish there was like a little scene instead of her figuring out their names. I mean, still have a little moment of her, because she would be interested in them.
Talk about cities. Talk about buildings. Talk about,
Why did they do a little walk around? You're telling me Milo wouldn't have wanted a little tour?
Yeah.
Doubt that.
That was a poor choice of just for comedy's sake. Because she is much smarter. And something I appreciate that the supervising animator for Kida really wanted to try and make sure happened was that she could have come off very stereotypical strong woman who's very straightforward. So he tried to make sure she had a lot of subtext and was very playful and curious, and that she always had multiple emotions going on in her world. Because when she's talking to her dad, she has a whole bunch of feelings. Like she is trying to help save. She's going through a lot. Like she goes through a lot in this movie.
Feel for her, and you're excited because it's not just we're going to the library.
Yes,
it's she's excited, so genuinely excited to learn about things, explain things, learn about the culture, all of that. It makes her more likable.
It's the vocal performance and it's the animation that really do bring out a playfulness in her, even though she is very intelligent and is very confident and blunt.
Oh, yeah.
But she is very sweet and kind, and I really enjoy all the subtleties they found in her to make her not two-dimensional. I do enjoy that our first introduction to her is that great lift up of the mask. And then when Moyer whispers something horrible in French to her, that she just straight up punches him in the face.
Yes.
And so much so that he flies off screen. So I do enjoy that you immediately understand she's not going to take anything.
Right.
More so even than Meg pushing Phil off. So there's also an instant dealing with the creepy person right away.
Well, and when you watch it a second time, your first introduction of her is a couple of scenes before that. Where you can tell it's her because she's the only one with a mask with a crown thing on it. So when you see their silhouettes a couple times and you're like, ooh, there's people down there.
Yes.
But then there's a moment where they run by and they look and they see them coming and they keep going, and she doesn't. She stays and looks, and that already opens up to this thirst for knowledge, this curiosity. That's really cool.
Yeah. They did a good job at doing the industrial 1910s.
All the steampunk stuff was so fun.
That was fun.
Really cool.
It was really fun. And I was looking up the era too, because this was the suffragette movement. And the fact that Audrey is in overalls and that Helga is a lieutenant is pretty, like, doesn't really fit the time period, but is really cool. And this is not about Kida, but I really appreciated how Milo asked Audrey how a woman mechanic was head in her field.
Oh my gosh. And I know this isn't about Kida as well, but just to talk on women in the story in general and how they were portrayed was during that conversation, my favorite moment of that. And I remember this from watching it as a kid too, that I thought it was so cool. Where they break all those gender norms in like 2 sentences.
Yep.
Where he asks her about that. And she talks about her father who wanted 2 sons, one to take over the car shop and the other to be a professional boxer. But then he was stuck with my sister and I. And Milo's like, oh, putting 2 and 2 together. Obviously, she succeeded. Yeah. And they had mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And Milo's like, well, where's your sister? And she's like, oh, defending the national title.
Casually, he's walking away.
With a little smirk. Like, with a little smirk, she says it. Yeah. And it's like gender norms thrown out the window completely and indefinitely from that moment on. And I really, really liked that.
I love that. And I really enjoyed the way they crafted the question, because it wasn't, how are you in charge? It was, no, I don't want to offend you. I'm just actually honestly curious.
It was more about her age.
Yeah, it's like, how did you get to be a famous mechanic? Yeah, I really appreciated that as how the women are treated in this. There's no kind of consciousness of them being lesser than or anything. Right. Like, Helga is the one barking orders to everyone on the ship.
Oh, yeah.
As the lieutenant. So I really appreciated that. And that you did have, I remember growing up that I loved that there were multiple women for me to see in the film. And like, it was just, it was really nice. And as an adult, I really appreciated it too, because it was 2001 and they had not only women in supervising roles, but they had people of color too.
Right.
So it was really fun.
But women too. Yes. I was confused why, because they had done so well with the group that goes down of the diversity, and there was lots of women. And then they talk about Kida's mom being the queen, but then only the kings of Atlantis are around the stone.
Oh, yeah.
They never talk about queens or anything. And that was kind of strange to me, because I'm like, you set this really great precedent. And then she goes, the kings of our past, and immediately drops down to pray.
Yeah.
Which was an appropriate reaction. But I'm like, that's really strange to me, that what happens to the queens when the queen is the one who was chosen to embody it and gave up her life for it, but she doesn't deserve a face?
That
seems
real
strange to me.
Good point that I hadn't thought of. I'm a little ashamed that I didn't think about it.
Oh, that's okay.
But and because she is without a doubt becoming queen next. Like it's not like they have to pass down through the male heir.
No, they're definitely like equal opportunity.
So what? That's annoying.
That's why were they all men?
That's real annoying. Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to.
Because wouldn't that be beautiful if Kida? Like, I do love the moment with her bracelet.
Yeah.
And her coming in and having, that was a really beautiful moment for Kida. I think that was really cool. And I love that they included that. And it was such a little thing that took no time at all.
Yeah.
That I really appreciated.
Yeah.
But you're telling me at the end that they couldn't have carved one for her mom too?
And then he would have been able to touch it and power both up, and it would have been.
Right. Yeah. It would have been a beautiful moment of, okay, we've learned from our past and now we're going to figure out how to move on, which is like her father's whole arc.
Yeah.
It's
it's him being afraid of them abusing their own power so that they hide them away. And then she wants to try and save the people by opening them
learning from that and changing it. Yeah. So I appreciate Kida a lot. I think she is very strong in all those moments. I just was confuzzled.
Yeah. But how stunning is it when she is all powered up and walks on water and all those things are crashing around her? What a beautiful power walk. And the water comes and there's like a bubble of safety around. Oh, it's so.
And everyone's scared.
It's so
like,
good.
All of them are scared. Milo is the least scared.
Yeah.
Because he's like, don't touch her.
Yeah.
But the other two are like noticeably, visibly scared. So I don't know. I think that was a really powerful moment.
I forgot how stunning that walk.
God. Especially, you don't expect the stones to fall.
Yes.
That's what caught me off guard. Is she's pulled down and then all of a sudden this CGI stone comes out of nowhere and hits the ground. So that was a very visually stunning moment, really showing the power that Kida alone at this point can wield.
Yeah. And okay, here's a big plot hole for me, and see if it is for you too, because I know that you said you had something that really bothered you. So she's this all-powerful thing. The crystal has the power source has apparently decided that to be safest, it needs to go into Kida to do something. If the power is supposed to protect the city, why in the world would she willingly go? And would the crystal willingly go when the crystal leaves, life on Atlantis dies as they know it? So
it doesn't make any sense why it Because also it like chose her to come up at that moment too.
Yeah.
I don't think it was her being like, oh, I'm going to go grab that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she knew what she was doing. I think it just called to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It didn't, that felt very spicy.
It felt like we don't want our citizens
somewhere.
to die now. So we're going to go with the people who have guns. But also, how is the language lost? That also doesn't.
That was my big plot hole. I really disliked that. Since everyone there outside of maybe the babies were alive, because nobody looks as old as Papa King.
Yeah.
Nobody looks as old as him. So every single person on that island who is Kida and up was alive before. And there are many people older than Kida. So you're telling me that nobody knew the language and no one remembered how to turn on those things?
Because they were flying them when when they were attacked, they were flying them.
I could understand like him trying to protect Kida because Kida was young enough.
Yeah,
she is portrayed as like 6 years old or so.
Yeah.
She's very little. So I could see it as the father is protecting her and doesn't want her to be hurt by how he grew up and caused this pain. So I get that, but you can't mind wipe everyone.
Well, maybe because it was thousands of years ago. So it's been thousands of years because apparently the power source is the fountain of youth as well with the crystal.
Right.
So if it was thousands and thousands of years ago, if he banned the use of everything, I get like maybe you would forget
how?
that.
Then how do they do anything? How do they write anything down? How did they
I don't know.
read?
There's still ruins
How did their
stuff.
society function without... Not that they couldn't completely function, but how would they keep track of...
And what do they write now?
Anything.
Nothing?
Yeah.
It doesn't track at all.
Did he burn all the libraries?
Books?
Like, I don't understand. That felt very cheap to me. I felt like there were other ways to do that. I don't know what those other ways were, but it felt very cheap. And like you had said too, they just called her and all of a sudden she was pulled up into it. It made sense for it to come to her.
Yes.
When the volcano... like eruption and her being brought back. Like that made sense to me.
Yeah. And it made sense that she needed to protect it or that it made sense to me that they were going to give it to her. Even I could buy that instead of it doing the whole stone garden thing. But then if she's this all powerful thing, if she just touched them, would they like vanish?
How come she can't get out of that cage? How does she even let them take her that far?
Chooses to go in that as the safe decision for Atlantis. But then with her leaving Atlantis dies. It doesn't make sense to me that she would self-sacrifice in that way or that the crystal, whose purpose is to protect Atlantis, would leave.
Right.
Because apparently it can raise stone giants. So why wouldn't you do that?
It's just like so weird. It's so weird.
So there's a lot of plot holes in this that really upset me. And it didn't upset me as a kid. I was like, oh yeah, that's fine. But as an adult, I'm sitting there going, come on. Like what? Why is... And then, okay, so not only does she magically get the power, which I'm okay with, but then she doesn't use it and they let her take her. But then when the people who switched sides, which was great, when Audrey was the first to cross over after Dr. Sweets, who was with the dad, but then they don't release her on their way across the line. Like, it seemed very convenient that no one was trying to release her out of the hundreds of people around watching this happen.
Just...
What? So...
Especially when they've set up that they have a really strong set of hunters. Yeah. Like the Atlantean people have a strong set of fighters who are so strong that they can vault themselves over boulders with ease with their own weapons. It was just
like, you telling me they didn't have like a special forces that's ready to come,
right?
Like,
especially since they've been diving deeper into these monster caves to find food, which is what was set up at the beginning.
Yes.
So I don't really know, but on the basis of Kida herself, I think she was a very interesting character.
Yes.
I really enjoyed learning about her. I was a little upset with some of the liberties taken.
Yes.
All these things we've been talking about for the past few minutes.
Yeah.
Like, that don't make sense with the character they built. But the character they built,
yes,
I think she's really cool and someone to look up to. I think she would raid the absolute hell out of Belle's library. And Belle would be... just panic behind her, like, make sure you put them back in the corner.
Oh, I love that. I love that she is like, she's an amalgam of lots of different styles. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
The
representation is really cool.
Yeah, she has tattoos. Like, I think that's really amazing, which they cut out of the second movie, which we will finally move into. Because it took longer to animate. So they cut so much of her tattoos out. And they did give her an outfit that was appropriate. It was
had nothing to do with her culture. They just made her American.
Yeah. She has a slight Britishness to her in the first movie, and it's completely American in the second.
Yeah.
So the second movie is 2003. It was released. They were planning on doing a television show of Atlantis, and then because it didn't do well at the box office, they scrapped that idea and then turned the first, I think, 3 of the storylines they were going to do into this second straight to VHS DVD, whatever it was, film called Atlantis: Milo's Return. How do you feel about the second movie? I've never seen it until now.
I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I really didn't like it. It didn't keep my attention. It was really frustrating. I loved the idea of all of the characters coming back. You still had that witty banter. You had the guy, would you believe it? Another Chinese laundry blown up.
Yep.
You know, you had those little moments.
Yes.
That, like, made it funny. And I did like seeing them back, and all their personalities seemed to stay intact, which was also really nice. I just didn't like that every single story, which was all 3, was just, my dad messed up. So now we have to make sure that we don't mess up. And it's all Atlantis' fault. And every single episode ended like that. And I'm like, wouldn't it have been so much more interesting if the series either started with Atlantis coming up, which is the ending scene of it, either it's starting with Atlantis coming up, or us being allowed to explore the world some more.
Yep.
I don't know. I see why it didn't do well, and I see why it did not turn into a TV show.
Well, and so I had similar feelings to you. What I did enjoy about it, and what I think could have been potentially really great, was the amount of traveling they did to different places and the discovery of other mythology. So I, as a mythology kind of nerd, loved that they covered they connected Atlantis to a lot of different places, which is kind of the mystery of Atlantis being this like utopia where everything came from.
It just felt cheap that then they finished it off with, and it's all our fault. We ruined everything.
Yes. And I think what could have been really cool. So I see it, knowing that it was supposed to be a TV show, it definitely is just 3 episodes of a TV show. It's not a movie.
Oh, it's not a movie.
Yeah. And I enjoy that Kida is trying to figure out whether or not Atlantis should come up, because that's a huge decision. That's a very big decision. And I do think they gave her a lot of great moments in this second film. I think she had a lot of agency. You get to kind of understand her feelings, and her and Milo's relationship is really sweet. So I did enjoy a lot of the characters in it, and that they did keep it pretty character driven.
Yeah, they definitely did that well, which is needed, because that's what you loved about Atlantis.
Yeah, exactly. So it just became more of an explore. It felt like it could have been, if you would do it today, would be like a Carmen Sandiego-esque version of mythology. Ooh. So that I was really interested. That could have been cool. I was really interested in the idea of them being the explorers who find legends and stuff. Yeah. Going and Kida learning about the surface world while trying to figure out whether or not they deserve Atlantis' healing. Because what's ironic to me is that Atlantis in this version was sunk because they were too greedy. But if they came to the surface in reality, they would just be completely, like, everyone would try to take over them. They would
Especially when they come up, they're coming up talking about U-boats, and it's during potentially World War I-ish.
Yeah, the war started in 1914, I believe.
And that's when this movie was.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I think they said it in the year that happens. But
they would literally just be coming up. Kida is like, I will return.
Yeah, like that's. I was trying to think, like, if I would redo in the actual TV show, like what would be interesting. Life in Atlantis would be really interesting. But I do think it's interesting to see Kida struggling with whether or not to bring it up, and then having Milo as a linguist expert and probably a mythology person come up and then all explore around the world. I enjoyed her in a sweater. I love that she got real people clothes and that they didn't continue to sexualize her at all. Like, there was they all were in these big fluffy sweaters, and They all get pants, which is really nice because we're still in the 1910s.
Oh,
so,
of course. It still felt strange, though, that they didn't that she didn't bring something up from her world, because if they're trying to make her not look like an Atlantean, then why did they bring that dumb lizard?
Yeah, lava dog.
Nobody questions.
It's like a Brazilian iguana. I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, and nobody thinks that's weird.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, there are so many.
It's the Disney magic of like Stitch is totally a dog,
right?
Like he looks like a koala, if anything, but he's blue. So
it just was strange to me.
Yeah, so it
didn't buy it.
So yeah, there's a lot of good things that I think could have been wonderful. It wouldn't have been a hit TV show, but it would almost
have been a really good series of like a short series of, okay, this is going to be 10 or 15 episodes and that's it. We're going to hit some big cultures that were influenced by, you know, like that would be really cool.
Yeah.
But no, I think they bit off more than they could chew.
And I don't think that Kida, after seeing the surface world, would choose to bring Atlantis into, like, I was really thinking about, like, why would she choose to give the world a huge, powerful weapon, essentially? Like, it doesn't make sense to me that it wouldn't be about them abusing it. It'd be about the world abusing it, because the world would. It would 100% abuse as an essentially the fountain of youth that heals people, because the crystals have healing energy. So it...
Right.
Which is very sad about our world, but very true.
Correct. Ugh.
But yeah, no, I really loved her. I love that the women overall in this movie were given a lot of power and agency, and were drawn.
They did a really great job.
In such a variety of shapes. You still had the femme fatale who ends up getting the bad guy in the end. You had a terrifying death of a villain in this movie. Yeah. It's really graphic and terrifying.
There was a lot of death.
Yeah, there was blood in this movie. So there's
and recognized death, not just like, oh, I pushed him off a cliff. Like, it was, they mourned the loss of hundreds of people.
It is the biggest body count still in a Disney movie, because they started off with 200 crew and they ended up with like 30. So within the first like 20 minutes of the film, it definitely felt like they didn't start with Atlantis. They started with a journey movie and then ended up choosing Atlantis as the destination. So it felt like it was the process before the story, or like the desire to do a style rather than tell a story. Yeah. And I think that was one of the many reasons why it didn't explode as this great new way of Disney. But ultimately, I think they were pretty happy with what they ended up with. They got to do an adventure animated movie.
Right.
Definitely hit me as an audience. Like, I was the target audience as someone who loved the adventure movie and did love the Star Wars movies too. So there was a sect of us that existed.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And like you had mentioned earlier, I loved as a kid seeing all the women.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't like Milo. Who doesn't like Milo? But it was like refreshing to see so many diverse women on it.
Yeah. And I didn't understand that's something I liked until I was older. But it definitely was really cool to see. And the fun fact that I will share is, at the beginning of the Atlantis process, they all got like t-shirts for the team, and it said Atlantis, less songs, more explosions. So that was the mantra of Atlantis. I just want, like,
amazing.
I want to see what those t-shirts look like. That's just such a fun thing to throw around the Disney animation studio.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, despite with how okay it did and all of the plot holes, I really appreciate the women in the story, and Kida is a very strong character, and I think they accomplished what they were going for, of still having that princess that Disney wants, but making her very unique, something that other people can look up to and be a really good role model.
Yeah, I think she's a great role model, and I think they went off the beaten path and it didn't quite work for them. I think they might do better now with more of the acceptance of animation as an overall genre rather than just fairy tales.
Right.
But I really enjoyed diving in to get to know Kida and the mystery of Atlantis. I encourage anyone to kind of jump into that internet hole of where is Atlantis and what is it. But thank you for joining us on our adventure with Kida, and I hope you come back for more.
Yes, please.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Damsels in Dialogue. Tune in next week as we go on another adventure into Africa, where we follow an English anthologist named Jane discover much more than elephants and gorillas in the jungle.
If you enjoyed listening today, we'd love to have you subscribe to this podcast, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and share with friends.
If you really enjoyed our discussion, you can find more behind-the-scenes content, a peek at our research notes, and even entire bonus episodes on Patreon. Each month, we release a full After Hours episode where we discuss the movies we cover in each episode, unfiltered and unrestrained, along with the behind-the-scenes extras and notes.
You can reach us on social media. Links to all our platforms can be found in our bio. On those platforms, you will find information about our upcoming season finale special, Maiden Madness, where we randomly place over 30 Disney animated heroines in a March Madness-style tournament to discover who is the top Disney animated heroine.
Brackets and more information will be released on our social media, so get your brackets filled out today and let us know who you think will emerge as champion.
Until next time, this has been Damsels in Dialogue.
Have a nice day.
This podcast is sponsored by Royal Princess Parties, LLC, and is produced by Hello Out There Audio, part of Hello Out There Productions.